You've probably heard someone say that Miami International Airport is a nightmare. Chances are, you've experienced it yourself. And if you haven't yet, this video might be your warning. This is Miami International Airport is getting worse every year. Here's why. The airport that can't keep up with itself. Let's start with a number, 55.93 million. That's how many passengers moved through Miami International Airport in 2024. That's a record. The year before, also a record. The year before that, another record. MIA has been breaking its own passenger numbers almost every year since the pandemic ended. And that sounds like great news until you actually have to be one of those passengers. For context, the airport handled about 45.9 million passengers in 2019, which was itself a record at the time. By 2024, that number had climbed to nearly 56 million, an increase of about 22% in 5 years. The infrastructure didn't grow 22%, the staffing didn't grow 22%, the number of runways didn't change. What changed was the volume of human beings funneled through a facility that was already operating at capacity before the surge began. Miami-Dade County officials have acknowledged as much. Even Mayor Daniela Levine Cava, who tends to frame MIA in the most optimistic possible terms, said at a 2024 briefing that all of the growth does mean wear and tear, and we have to keep up with that wear and tear. That is a fairly candid admission that keeping up has been, shall we say, a work in progress. The J.D. Power 2024 North American Airport Satisfaction Study ranked MIA tied for 10th out of 20 airports in the mega airport category, a significant drop from a year earlier when it had ranked tied for 4th. In the span of 12 months, the passenger experience at MIA got measurably worse by one of the industry's most watched satisfaction benchmarks. The cargo numbers are worth mentioning here too because they add another layer to the congestion story. MIA is the busiest cargo airport in the United States, handling over 3 million tons of freight in 2024. A significant portion of the fresh-cut flowers sold in the U.S. for Valentine's Day and Mother's Day come through this airport. So do enormous quantities of perishable goods, pharmaceuticals, and high-value shipments moving between North America and Latin America. The cargo operation and the passenger operation share the same airfield, the same ground transportation networks, and the same surrounding roads. When both are at record levels simultaneously, the pressure on every system compounds. MIA is also the second busiest airport in the U.S. for international passengers, behind only John F. Kennedy in New York. That ranking carries prestige, but it also means MIA is processing a higher proportion of first-time visitors, non-English speakers, and passengers navigating international arrivals, customs, and immigration than most U.S. airports do. International arrivals at any airport are slower and more procedurally complex than domestic ones. At MIA, they happen at massive scale, and the facilities handling them are the same aging infrastructure that the rest of the airport is struggling with. An airport built for a different era. Miami International Airport traces its origins to 1928, when Pan American Airways acquired land in Miami for what would become the first airport in the United States, with international port of entry facilities. That's an impressive distinction to hold, and it's one MIA has never let anyone forget. The modern terminal complex took shape in phases starting in the 1950s, when commercial aviation was exploding and Miami was positioning itself as the gateway to Latin America and the Caribbean. Eastern Airlines, National Airlines, and Pan American built their operations out of MIA and turned it into a genuinely important hub for international travel. By 1950, the airport was already handling 1.4 million passengers a year and an average of 900 daily flights. Impressive numbers for the era, though a tiny fraction of what the facility handles today. The problem with airports designed and built in the mid-20th century is that they were designed and built for mid-20th century air travel. Aircraft were smaller, passenger volumes were a fraction of what they are today. Security screening as we now know it didn't exist. The physical layout of MIA, its terminals, its concourses, its road access, reflects decisions made decades ago in a world that no longer exists. Subsequent expansions and renovations have tried to address this, with varying success. The North Terminal, Concourse D, opened in phases beginning in 2007 and was a genuine improvement. But the airport's overall footprint, its road network, its parking structures, and its internal transit systems are still fundamentally the product of a different age of aviation. You can renovate a 1950s building, but you can't change the fact that it was conceived for conditions that have since multiplied several times over. The road access to MIA is its own particular headache. The airport sits in a dense, urban environment in western Miami-Dade County, and the roads connecting it to the wider highway network were not designed for the traffic volumes generated by a facility handling 56 million passengers a year. Dropping someone off or picking them up at MIA during peak hours is an experience that can turn a 10-minute drive into 45 minutes of stop and go on the airport's internal roadways and the surrounding surface streets. The terminal layout itself creates navigational confusion that is legendary among frequent travelers. MIA is a horseshoe-shaped facility with multiple concourses that don't connect easily to each other at the airside level. Getting from a gate in Concourse J to a gate in Concourse D, which can happen if you're making a connection, requires navigating through the terminal in ways that are not always intuitive, especially for international travelers encountering the airport for the first time. Signage has improved over the years, but the underlying geometry of the building is what it is. The SkyTrain Saga. If you want a single story that captures what's happening at MIA, the SkyTrain is a good place to start. The MIA SkyTrain connects Concourse D, the sprawling, mile-long American Airlines hub, with the MIA Mover, which in turn connects passengers to the rental car center and transit hub. It opened in September 2010 as part of the North Terminal development. At the time, it was celebrated as a modernization achievement, the kind of infrastructure that would make MIA more competitive with peer airports. In September 2023, the SkyTrain shut down entirely. The reason? Extensive cracking detected in the system's infrastructure. This was a train that was 13 years old, not 50 years old, 13. 3 of the stations eventually reopened in March 2024, with the full system not resuming service until August 2025, nearly 2 years after the closure. During that entire time, passengers who needed to get from the far end of Concourse D to the rental car center or the Tri-Rail Transit Hub had to walk. And not a short walk. We're talking potentially a mile or more through a busy international terminal with luggage in the Miami heat if they had any outdoor exposure at all. A free shuttle bus was available as an alternative, but shuttle buses and international airports are not a combination that works smoothly when tens of thousands of people are moving through simultaneously. The total cost of the SkyTrain repairs exceeded $4 million. The cost to the experience of millions of passengers who went through MIA during those 2 years is harder to quantify, but very easy to imagine. The SkyTrain failure was also notable for who it affected most directly: arriving international passengers who needed to reach ground transportation and travelers picking up rental cars. In a city where the rental car is often the only practical transportation option for visitors, forcing those travelers into a shuttle system not designed to handle the full load was a daily reminder of how interconnected airport systems are and how badly one failure cascades into everything else. It also raised questions that weren't answered very loudly. How does a 13-year-old transit system develop structural cracking severe enough to require a nearly 2-year shutdown? And if the SkyTrain was in that condition, what else was being quietly monitored rather than repaired? Everything else that doesn't work. The SkyTrain wasn't an isolated incident. It was the most visible symptom of a systemic infrastructure maintenance problem that had been building for years. MIA operates over 600 conveyance units, elevators, escalators, and moving walkways distributed across the terminal complex. On any given day, according to reporting by the Miami Herald, about 7% of those units are out of service. That sounds like a small percentage until you consider that 600 units times 7% is roughly 42 broken escalators, elevators, or moving walkways at any moment. For a traveler with mobility challenges, a parent with a stroller, or someone hauling heavy bags, a broken moving walkway is not a minor inconvenience. It's a real obstacle in a facility that was designed with those systems functioning. Ralph Coutier, director of the Miami-Dade Aviation Department, acknowledged the situation and stated he hoped to cut that failure rate in half. The county commission approved nearly $700 million in contracts to repair or replace aging systems. That's a meaningful commitment, but it also tells you something about how far behind the maintenance had fallen. You don't need $700 million in repair contracts for a facility that's been properly kept up. In January 2024, Miami-Dade County announced a comprehensive repair and replacement program targeting 126 passenger loading bridges, 203 public bathrooms, and all 616 conveyance units to be completed in phases over 5 to 7 years. Some of the infrastructure being addressed, officials noted, was 50 years old, in an airport handling 56 million passengers a year. As one county official put it bluntly, some of the infrastructure is 50 years old and needs to be replaced, not repaired. That statement deserves a moment. 50-year-old infrastructure serving 56 million annual passengers. The terminal that opened in phases in the 1970s is now being maintained alongside the 2007 North Terminal, and the maintenance backlog on the older sections has been allowed to accumulate to a point where the county's own officials frame the situation as one requiring replacement rather than repair. That's not a crisis that happened suddenly. That's a crisis that was documented, discussed, and deferred for a very long time before the funding was committed to address it. The parking problem. Getting to MIA and finding somewhere to put your car has developed into its own category of misery. The airport's garages regularly hit capacity during peak travel periods: spring break, holidays, summer. When the garages are full, travelers are redirected to overflow lots that may or may not have clear signage, may or may not be clearly designated for overnight parking, and may or may not have anyone around to answer questions. In March 2025, Local 10 News captured the situation in vivid detail. One traveler described driving 6 floors to find a spot in the only garage that had any availability at all. Another described standing in a lot with contradictory signs, some indicating overflow parking, others warning against overnight parking, with no staff visible to clarify which rule applied. A $136 million parking garage with 2,200 additional spaces broke ground in 2023, which is good news. Groundbreaking in 2023 and being available when you're trying to make your flight this summer are, unfortunately, not the same thing. The parking situation is emblematic of a broader pattern at MIA, growth arriving faster than the infrastructure built to support it. The airport knew passenger numbers were climbing. The solutions were approved and funded, but the gap between the problem and the solution is measured in years, and during those years, millions of travelers experience the airport as it is rather than as it will eventually be. There's also no single, obvious alternative for most travelers. Uber and Lyft drop-offs feed into the same congested curbside that every departing passenger is navigating. The MIA mover connecting to the rental car center and transit hub was offline when the SkyTrain was down. Ride-share pricing at peak times at MIA can be punishing. The Brightline connection is useful for certain origin points, but doesn't serve most of Miami-Dade County's residential areas directly. The net result is that a very high proportion of travelers arrive by car, which means the parking problem is also a traffic problem, is also a departure time problem. It all connects. American Airlines owns this airport. Any honest analysis of MIA's situation has to spend serious time on American Airlines, because American Airlines is, in practical terms, MIA. American carries about 56% of all passengers at Miami International. That is a staggering concentration of market share. The North Terminal, Concourse D, is essentially an American Airlines facility that happens to be operated by Miami-Dade County. In 2024, American's hub at MIA was described by the airline's own vice president for Miami, the Caribbean, and Latin America as the carrier's largest international operation worldwide. The airline has more than 14,600 employees based in Miami. When one airline controls more than half of all traffic at a major airport, it creates a structural dependency that cuts both ways. American's commitment to MIA has been a major driver of the airport's passenger growth. It's also the reason that when American has a bad day, a systems outage, a staffing problem, a schedule disruption, MIA has a catastrophically bad day. American Airlines' operational reliability has been an ongoing story in the aviation press for several years. The airline went through significant operational disruptions in the early post-pandemic period as it struggled to manage a rapid return of travel demand with a workforce and infrastructure that hadn't fully recovered. Every major American disruption ripples through MIA with outsized effect precisely because of that 56% market share. The third-party contractor situation adds another layer of complexity. Multiple services at MIA, baggage handling, aircraft cleaning, ground support, are handled by outside contractors rather than directly by the airlines or the airport. One contractor that has appeared repeatedly in news coverage of MIA's service problems is Yulin America, which has handled various ground services at the airport. When the quality of third-party services degrades, it affects every passenger whose bag goes through the system or whose aircraft is serviced before departure. American has taken some steps to address these issues, at various points reverting to hiring from within for certain functions like baggage offloading and aircraft cleaning rather than relying on third-party labor. Whether those efforts have produced measurable improvements is a question that depends heavily on which traveler you ask and which day they happen to fly through. There's also the question of what MIA's dependence on American Airlines means for passengers who don't fly American. If you're traveling on a carrier with a smaller presence at MIA, you're still operating in an airport whose capacity, gate availability, and operational rhythm are largely calibrated around one dominant airline's schedule. The airport bends to Americans' timetable in ways that can be invisible until they aren't. The weather factor. Miami is in South Florida. South Florida has weather. These two facts are in irreconcilable conflict with the goal of running an efficient airport, and they have been since the first plane landed here. Thunderstorm season in South Florida runs from roughly May through October, which, not coincidentally, overlaps almost perfectly with the period of peak travel demand at an airport that serves beach destinations, cruise ports, and Caribbean routes. During active storm periods, it is not unusual for MIA to experience ground stops that cascade into delays measured in hours rather than minutes. In June 2024, a single heavy rain event resulted in 221 canceled flights and 165 delayed flights at MIA, 53% of all flights at the airport on that day. Flash flooding from that same storm forced the Florida Highway Patrol to shut down sections of Interstate 95 near Fort Lauderdale, compounding the transportation disruption well beyond the airport itself. That's not a freak occurrence. Weather-related disruption at MIA during storm season is an expected operating condition, not an exception. The banked flight structure that MIA operates, where large waves of departures and arrivals are scheduled in tight windows to maximize efficiency, means that weather delays don't just affect the flights caught in the storm. They compress the schedule for every subsequent wave, and the ripple effect can persist for hours or even into the following day for an airport handling the volume that MIA does. MIA ranked 5th on a 2022 list of the worst major U.S. airports for flight delays, with about 24.4% of flights delayed that year. Weather is a significant driver of that number, but it's not the only one. The banked structure, the high volume, the ATC constraints, the single airline dominance, all of it feeds the delay statistics simultaneously. Weather just gets the blame because it's the most visible and the easiest to explain. What makes the weather problem particularly frustrating is that it's not predictable in a way that allows easy planning. South Florida's afternoon thunderstorms can build quickly, hit hard, and clear within an hour. But that hour of ground stop multiplied across a schedule with hundreds of aircraft and tight connections creates a cascade that doesn't resolve for the rest of the day. Travelers who booked what appeared to be a safely timed connection can find themselves stranded in Concourse D, watching the departure board flip to delayed after delayed after delayed, with no clear end in sight and customer service lines stretching into the distance. Summer afternoons in Miami are not a weather aberration. They are a predictable, recurring feature of operating an airport in the subtropics. Every airline scheduling team knows this. Every operations planner knows this. The schedule gets built anyway, tightly and optimistically, because airline economics demand maximum aircraft utilization. When reality arrives at 3 p.m. in the form of a thunderstorm cell over the Everglades, the gap between the optimistic schedule and actual operations is where delays are born and where the MIA experience earns its reputation. The air traffic control problem. Here's one problem at MIA that has nothing to do with the airport itself, and everything to do with the national aviation system it operates within. The United States has been running a serious air traffic controller shortage for years. As of September 2023, the nation's airport control towers and approach facilities had about 7,047 certified controllers, against a goal of nearly 9,000. That's roughly 2,000 positions short nationwide. An independent FAA safety review completed in 2023 found that inadequate staffing, combined with outdated equipment, was rendering the current level of safety unsustainable. The report noted that controllers were working at historically high overtime levels, contributing to fatigue. The numbers behind the shortage are sobering. The U.S. had about 3.9% fewer air traffic controllers in 2024 than it did in 2013. In that same period, the annual number of flights in the country rose by 6.5%. Controller employment went in one direction. Flight volume went the other. That gap doesn't close on its own, and it doesn't close quickly. Training a new controller to full certification takes approximately 3 years, and the mandatory retirement age for controllers is 56, which creates a constant outflow from the experienced end of the workforce. The Miami Air Traffic Control Center has made headlines of its own. In January 2023, issues at the Miami Center triggered ground stops, affecting flights across Florida and beyond. In a widely shared first-hand account published on an aviation website, an airline pilot described sitting at the hold short line at Miami late at night, trying to call for clearance on an impenetrable frequency, a direct consequence of controller workload. MIA's specific vacancy rate was reported as relatively better than some other major airports, particularly compared to the severely understaffed New York area facilities where vacancy rates ran above 35%. But better than Newark is not a standard that inspires confidence when you're sitting on the tarmac at MIA, watching your departure time drift into the past. The FAA hired more than 1,800 controllers in fiscal year 2024, calling it the largest hiring class in nearly a decade. What the agency was less eager to highlight was that the net gain after retirements and attrition was significantly smaller than 1,800, and that training takes years. The pipeline to a fully staffed national air traffic control system runs through years, not months. Florida's airspace is particularly complex. The state has 4 large commercial airport hubs: Miami, Orlando, Tampa, and Fort Lauderdale, operating in relatively close proximity, plus a large number of general aviation fields and military airspace. The volume and density of traffic moving through Florida's airspace puts sustained pressure on controllers in ways that compound the national shortage in a geographically specific way. The $9 billion question. Miami-Dade County is not ignoring these problems. To its credit, the county has committed to a program of investment that, on paper at least, addresses most of what's wrong with MIA. The airport's Future Ready Action Plan represents a $9 billion investment program, later described as part of a $12 billion capital improvement commitment, targeting essentially every aspect of the airport's aging infrastructure: passenger loading bridges, bathrooms, moving walkways, escalators, elevators, parking structures, concourse expansions, terminal modernizations. The scope is comprehensive. The plan includes demolishing Concourse G, expanding Concourse K, and building a new Concourse F. An on-site hotel is expected to be completed in 2027. Biometric boarding technology has been integrated at all 60 gates in Concourse D. New airline ticket counters are being installed between Concourses F and H. The new parking garage with 2,200 spaces broke ground in 2023. These are real investments, and they matter. But several things are also true simultaneously. The investments are happening while the airport is fully operational and handling record passenger volumes, which means construction adds its own friction to the experience. The timeline for full completion runs years into the future. Some of what's being fixed was allowed to deteriorate for so long that even county officials describe it as decades of neglected maintenance. The Brightline high-speed rail service launched a connection to MIA in 2023, providing a link between the airport and Miami Beach, as well as connections to Fort Lauderdale and eventually Orlando. That's a genuine improvement in how passengers can get to and from the airport without navigating the road network. Whether it meaningfully reduces vehicular congestion at MIA remains to be seen. The car remains the dominant mode of access for most travelers, and changing that requires behavior shifts that take years to materialize. Some Miami-Dade officials have gone further than optimism. Commissioner Kevin Marino Cabrera argued publicly that the county should consider planning for an entirely new airport rather than trying to fix a facility that is already nearing capacity. That position has not prevailed in county planning discussions, but the fact that it's being raised at all says something about how serious the long-term capacity question has become. A $9 billion renovation of an airport that is already at its limits is an enormous investment. If the demand projections hold and MIA is handling 70 million passengers a decade from now, the question of whether renovation is enough will come back around. The bottom line: Miami International Airport's problems are real, varied, and connected in ways that make them difficult to solve quickly. The passenger growth is not going to stop. Miami's role as the gateway to Latin America and the Caribbean is structural and durable. The city is growing. International travel to and from South Florida is growing. American Airlines has bet its largest international hub on MIA and is not moving. The volume of people who need to pass through this airport is not going to decline. The infrastructure was built for a different era and allowed to age without adequate maintenance for too long. The renovation programs now underway are genuine and substantial. They are also racing against current demand rather than getting ahead of it. The weather is going to keep doing what South Florida weather does. The air traffic control system is going to keep struggling with a staffing shortage that has been building for over a decade. The single airline dominance at MIA is going to keep amplifying whatever operational problems American Airlines experiences on any given day. The construction that's meant to fix the airport is going to keep adding friction to the experience of the travelers it's trying to serve. None of these problems exist in isolation. They interact. A weather delay backs up the gates. Backed up gates strain ground crews. Strained ground crews create baggage delays. Baggage delays generate lines at customer service. Customer service lines pile up in terminals where the moving walkways may or may not be working, and the parking situation was already a nightmare before any of this started. The traveler in the middle of all this, the one who paid a significant amount of money for a flight, showed up on time, and is now standing on a broken escalator watching their gate time change for the third time, is not experiencing an abstract policy problem. They're experiencing a real breakdown between what a major international airport promises and what it currently delivers. None of this is unfixable. Other airports have rebuilt themselves from worse positions. Singapore's Changi, London's Heathrow, Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson all have dealt with capacity challenges and come through. But fixing it requires sustained investment, realistic timelines, and honest acknowledgement that the airport as it currently exists is not meeting the demands being placed on it. The $9 billion plan suggests the county is beginning to take the scale of that challenge seriously. In the meantime, you might want to give yourself an extra hour or two, or maybe just fly out of Fort Lauderdale. And that is why Miami International Airport is getting worse every year. If this video helped you understand what's actually going on at one of America's busiest airports, hit the like button and subscribe. We break down the stories behind the places and systems that affect everyday life. New videos every week.